Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Weaver. I'm the Self-Sufficiency Manager here at Community Progress Council, and today we are going to be talking about de-escalation. You all can just take a moment to either refresh your memory of our mission and our vision, or take the time to read this through if you are just joining us on our team here at Community Progress. So our agenda for the day is here, and we are going to start with some reflection questions, or just one reflection question for you to just think about your own personal experiences and what this means to you. We're going to talk about the types of communication. We're going to talk about nonverbal communication and unpack that in some detail so we can understand how important it is when it comes to effectively de-escalating someone. We'll talk about precipitating factors, being a solid object for an individual that is in a state of escalation. We'll talk about the verbal escalation continuum and how someone goes from their normal speaking tone and volume to potentially yelling, and then maybe other physical things along with that. We're going to talk about coping, which is an acronym for repairing or debriefing when someone has gone through a escalated state and then come back down. We're going to talk about rational detachment as it relates to our work with participants and families that experience these circumstances. And then we're going to talk about the nature of how our behavior impacts the behavior of those around us. So I want you to think about what your initial thoughts are when you hear the word de-escalation. What does that mean to you? What are your experiences with someone that's in a state that's escalated? And how do you respond to that? So just take a moment and think about that. If you're doing this from your computer, you could write this out, and then we will go from there. So we're going to dive right into communication here. You're going to see three different types of communication on this slide. You're going to see nonverbal, paraverbal, and verbal. And what might be surprising to you is that only 7% of what we communicate is conveyed through the words that we speak. So an incredible percentage, 93%, if you've done your math already, is conveyed through nonverbal language and through paraverbal language. And we're going to break those down a little bit in the next few slides. But what I want you to start to become aware of is that when we're communicating with someone, much of what we are communicating is not through our words, it is through other methods. And this is going to be an integral part of being able to de-escalate someone when they are in a state of heightened emotion and they are not going to just have you say the right thing and it flip a switch. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle here, and we want to make sure that we are aware of how impactful the things that we don't say and the things that we do are when it comes to someone who's escalated. So we're going to get into that in the next few slides. All right, so here is a breakdown of nonverbal, paraverbal, and verbal. And if these three words under nonverbal mean nothing to you, do not worry. We're going to break them down in our next slide. I don't expect that you know how to say them or that you carry this information on and use it in detailed fashion in your day-to-day work. It is just to give us an understanding of all of the things that are behind our communication. So nonverbal communication involves proxemics, haptics, and kinesics. We're going to break those down in the next slide. Paraverbal communication. This is this world of it's not what you say, it's how you say it. You know, I know if anybody has children, they probably have used that phrase before. That is the world of paraverbal communication. So it involves our tone of voice, the volume we're speaking at, our prosody, our rhythm, our pitch, our intonation. So this is what makes spoken word poetry so powerful. They really tap into this prosody and being able to take you with them on a ride of emotion and all of the things they help you to visualize. A lot of that is done through their prosody. And then your cadence or your pacing. So if you're talking really fast, you might be in a space where you're feeling anxious or you're feeling frustrated, or if you're talking really slow, maybe you're tired. So these are things that you're communicating and the ways that you speak. And then we have our verbal, which is the spoken words that come out of our mouth. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to break down nonverbal communication even further, but just good rule of thumb to remember, paraverbal is it's not what you say, it's how you say it. All right, so here we are getting more into the depth of nonverbal communication. So for haptics, kinesics, and proxemics, again, this is for informational purposes, just to give you some awareness of all of the things involved, not to paralyze you or to throw too much information at you, just to give you some things to keep in the back of your mind. So for haptics, this involves physical touch. So handshake, hugs, back rub. For little kids that are really escalated, this is something that we're heavily going to use. That solid touch of having someone to just hold you, especially as a young kiddo that we have in some of our early childhood education programs, that can make a difference between them continuing to be escalated or continuing in a tantrum or something of that nature. Just having that physical touch occur can be a game changer for some of our kids. Then we have kinesics. So there's a couple different parts of this, and the first part is gestures. So when you think of the word gesture, you're likely thinking of what is described as an illustrator. So you'll see that in the parentheses here, and that's whenever we use something to convey the message that we are speaking. So whether that be pointing to a door as we say the word door, or if we are having a situation where we're using our hands to emphasize the size of something, that it's big or it's small. Those are going to be our illustrators as it relates to gestures. Then we also have emblems, and these are culturally defined signals. In our culture, we have thumbs up. Most people can recognize thumbs up. Actually, that's one of the most recognized symbols across the world. And then we have OK, where we'll make an O with our hand, 3 fingers up, and people recognize that as meaning the word okay. This does not include American Sign Language or things of that nature, because those are languages in and of themselves, but these are those things that we signal with our hands that communicate messages. And then we have adapters, which I'm working my way up backwards through this parentheses, but these are behaviors that give us some grounding often, and some of them are things like clicking pens, or some individuals will shake their legs to get out excess energy, sometimes scratching or twirling your hair, fidgeting with your fingers or your hands. Some of you might be doing that right now as you watch this video. And these are all natural things that we all do. When someone's in a state of heightened emotion or they're escalated, these are things we can pay attention to, either increasing or decreasing when we see them kind of rising in that emotion or in their frustration or whatever that experience might be. We might see these increase in intensity. So we also have head movements and posture. So someone being straight up and looking directly at you, they're engaged. As they start to slump down or they move their gaze away from you, that's something that you can take note of. Eye contact when they're looking straight at you, or if they start, taking a tour of the room and tuning out the things that you're saying. And then facial expressions. We all know that the way that we widen our eyes, especially when it relates to early kids, sometimes we can raise our eyebrows and widen our eyes, and they know it's time that we stop doing what we're doing right now, that the mom look that you give the kiddos. And when it comes to adults, sometimes we're conveying things very significantly through the way that our facial expressions are. Those are things that we can display a space of openness and that we are available to be talked to, or we can say, do not talk to me, with the way that we have our facial expressions and the way that we convey that message. So those all fall in that category of kinesics. And then we hop over here to proxemics on the right. And this is basically just how comfortable individuals are with you being in their space. Sometimes we call this our personal bubble. So this is derived from the Crisis Prevention Institute trainings, and they have their 4 blocks. So they have intimate space, and they describe this as a space that you would have your loved ones or your spouse. That's where you're comfortable with them being, and that would be very close to you. Maybe just even right next to you. Personal space. So this is a space around you that you are comfortable with, friends being, family members. This is how close you're comfortable with them being. Then we have a social space where people that are maybe acquaintances or coworkers, we're comfortable with them being in that space. And then we have a public space where people, maybe that we haven't met before, or if we're in the grocery store, how comfortable are we standing or being next to somebody? And these factors are all influenced by people's experiences. We have to understand how trauma impacts how people might react to these certain things, and how individuals' sense of personal control might impact these things, their age, their frame of mind in the moment, their culture, and personal hygiene also something to consider. So that these are all parts of nonverbal communication, and they're really important when we think about someone who is escalated in a state of heightened emotion, and we're trying to walk them back down and guide them back down. These are all pieces of that we need to be aware of, not only of the participant or the child or the family exhibiting these things, but also ourselves. All right. So if you are doing this with another individual, you are going to have a paired activity to engage in. If you are not, then you're going to have an individual reflective activity to go through here in this time. And I'm just going to go through this here. This quote, I think it really illustrates what we're talking about here. It's by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And as you can see, it's what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. So just kind of hammering in this idea that there's so much more to communication than what we say, and we have to capture that when it comes to de-escalation if we're going to be effective. So go ahead and take that time to either do your paired group activity or your self-reflection nonverbal communication activity, and then we'll hop back on here for the rest of the training. All right, welcome back. I hope you got something from that activity, and you guys kind of were able to take in a little bit of how, if you're intentionally trying to convey a message nonverbally, that you really can do that. So we're going to talk now about precipitating factors. And this really involves when we have a family or a participant, or even for ourselves, when we meet with someone, there are always so many things going on in the background of one another's lives. I know that for the early childhood education, they refer to this as their backpack and the things that they carry in their backpack. And so this really just dives into what are some of the factors that some of the people that come to us are dealing with. So, when we look at some precipitating factors as far as transportation is concerned, a lot of our participants have barriers when it comes to transportation. There may be, delays in the public transit system. They might have their car break down. They might not have any access to transportation, whether that be lack of funding to obtain a bus pass, or, use the car sharing rides like Uber and Lyft, or just traffic. Sometimes that's enough to have somebody off of what they're typically like, offbeat, because they've been in traffic for an hour, 2 hours. So I actually used to live in Jacksonville, Florida, and you would sit in traffic on the bridge for what seemed like an endless amount of time. And so, it changes things a little bit if you don't take that time to just accept that you're in traffic and there's nothing you can do about it. But, it can be really frustrating, and that really does change how someone might come into you. Home life. There's so many things that are going on in the houses of our family members. Some of them may just have challenges, could be because of some behavioral things with some of the children. It could be that, there's some toxicity between the relationships in the home, whether that be potential for domestic violence, or whether that be spousal relationship that's just really heated and they're not seeing eye to eye. And that's not to say that all of our participants are experiencing all of these things or any of these things, but some of them are. And these are things that we really need to keep in mind is if we say something and it's just like they react in a second to something that seems not worthy of that reaction to us, we need to understand there might have been so many other things that happened in their day, and this was just that straw that broke the camel's back, and they are off and running with it. So, we talk about the neighborhood they live in, that safety piece, that safety and security. If that's not there, that can leave someone on edge and feeling that carrying over into all the other aspects of their life. We have employment and education. They might have lost a job or their wages are not enough to sustain their family. They could have a career setback, and sometimes that could be that there's potentially some either misdemeanors or charges that are keeping them from getting the employment that they want or getting into a program that they want or receiving financial aid to pursue education. All those barriers, that can seem like such a stumbling block. And it's, something that they're constantly having to hurdle. And that's something that we really need to understand when we're providing information or when we are supporting them through reacting to different things. And then, we have their personal health, and this includes mental health, physical health, or even health of their children, or we have some participants that may be taking care of elderly parents. Anyone that's had a family member go through those stages of dementia or Alzheimer's, those are really difficult things and very complex things to process and deal with, and they don't make life stop moving, and life doesn't stop, spinning. They still have to take care of all of the things in their life, take care of their kids, go to work for those and pursue their education. All of these things are going on in the background. And then they come to meet with us for a coaching session or for an ERAP appointment or for a WIC appointment. And these are things that we just need to be aware of when we're going into these meetings with our families, with our kiddos, with our participants. And we're going to go ahead and dive deeper in now to that verbal escalation continuum. So this is the solid object relationship model, and we're just touching on this before we go into the verbal escalation continuum. And this is something that the PBIS team in the early childhood education is the expert on. So I'm going to do my best here to kind of give a little overview of what this entails, but I think it pertains to everyone, not just to the child and the teachers in that environment, but even to all participants and all people that work with one another. So this is about being a solid object for whomever it is that you are engaging with, whether that be the child or their parent or a participant that's involved in any of our programs. And a lot of the characteristics of this is having that calm voice, that pass the salt voice that you would use at a dinner table when you're asking someone to pass the salt. You're centered and balanced and you're being fair, empathetic, understanding, and patient. And you can actually take the time to listen and then provide that verbal reassurance. And you can, especially as it relates to kiddos, but even there are times where it's appropriate to be firm in circumstances with participants without being intimidating or without crossing the line or disrespecting someone. And a really cool acronym is the Q-tip, and they use this a lot, but Q-tip standing for quit taking it personally. So this really ties into our last slide about precipitating factors. When someone is directly coming at you with any kind of, if they're verbally shouting or even if they are attacking you and calling things out in you, a lot of times it still isn't, it's not about you. It's just that you're that person that's in front of them in that moment. They've had all these other things going on and you just happen to be the one that kind of set that switch. And it's got to be something that we continually practice, not to take it personally and not to be offended, because it can easily happen. And another part of this is, validating their feelings when it's appropriate, and helping them to process those feelings, and then watching, just watching for signs of intention of the things that they might do next. And so they need to know that you have the desire and the capacity to help them. They need to know that you want to. And that has to come across in your relationship and in your interactions with them. And I know some of us have a short time, some of us has longer, but there are ways for us to start to be mindful and incorporate this. And then just being aware of your own personal triggers that might come up in a situation with a participant, even day to day, but especially in an escalated situation, just working on those things and doing the work in ourselves so that we know we're equipped to handle those things. And then always reaching out for help if we need it. That's always available. And we'll get into the verbal escalation continuum. All right, so here is the continuum of verbal escalation. This does not encompass every circumstance. This is derived from the Crisis Prevention Institute. And so this training is actually developed in a way that the intent is to avoid physical restraint. And this is all about with individuals that are in healthcare facilities or that work in the behavioral health field. I worked as a behavior consultant for a special education school for emotional support kiddos and those with various disabilities. And so a lot of high intensity physical aggression, a lot of circumstances that need de-escalating. And this program is developed to make restraint a last resort. And there are times where that does happen, but this is developed for us to see all of the ways that we can intervene before something gets out of hand. So when someone is verbally escalated, yelling, or they have gotten to a place, they're just throwing off expletives, just cursing left and right, potentially throwing stuff. A lot of times we're going to see them follow through this continuum, and they won't always go from questioning to refusal to release. They might jump around. So we're going to hit each of these points, talk a little bit about each of them, and then we'll just talk about how this might flow and you might experience it in your day-to-day. So we have questioning on this continuum. So this involves two different types of questioning. When you're with someone that might be getting escalated, there are times where they're asking questions because they truly want the answer to those questions. They really want to understand, why in the world is this happening? Tell me about it. And then we have the other side of this, and that is those that ask questions to be challenging or to provoke someone. So this can happen with all ages. It truly can. And we just have to be able to discern which piece of this is playing out. And that's not always simple, but it's important to keep in mind. And there are times if someone's asking a question, our response can be to answer that. We can provide the information. Sometimes providing information can help to diffuse a situation, because when they understand why, they're more apt to empathize with what's going on and come down. Again, this isn't 100%. None of human behavior is going to be 100%, but this is definitely something that can occur. And then when someone is asking questions to just challenge, and you recognize that they've asked a question, you've given the answer, and they're just kind of trying to spin the wheel and turn things, twist things up a little bit. These are times where we can redirect. You do not have to answer every question that is asked. There are ways to redirect back to purpose, intention, and maybe just restating what's been stated in certain circumstances. And that can be effective, because when you're doing this verbal tango with someone, that builds tension, and it's not always appropriate. And it's not going to, with a situation where someone's asking a question to be challenging, it's not going to help de-escalate them. If anything, it's going to help move them down the line, as we see here, to the next spot, or even to the release spot. So next on the continuum, we have refusal. And this is where someone is just flat out saying, I'm not going to do what you say I'm going to do. That could be, a kiddo that's like, no, I'm not coming to the table to sit for my lunch. I'm going to sit right here on the floor. Obviously, there's different approaches for children than with adults. We're not going to treat an adult like a child. Obviously, that's going to send them straight up. Up as far as escalation goes. And that can be circumstantial, but overall, when someone's refusing to do something, we just need to set boundaries. So if that means that we're no longer going to engage, if someone is, this could be a potential situation where someone's escalated in the hall and we've asked them, hey, can we please come into this private space and talk? If they're saying no, I want to do this right here and right now, you do not have to abide by that. You can say, I'm right here. I want to talk with you. I want to work through this. But we need to do this in a private space for both your privacy and for the privacy and comfort of those in this building. And so you can stand there with the door open and you can wait until they make a decision whether to come in and sit and talk with you or to leave. And that is appropriate. That is something that it can just continue to get out of hand if you don't set those boundaries. If you don't set those boundaries with the kiddos in the classroom and have that structure and that expectation, I'm pretty sure everyone listening to this will know what that can lead to, and it's not something that's safe for anybody in the environment. So that's appropriate in those situations. When we go along this continuum, we've gone from we're challenging, we're questioning, we're refusing to do what you ask us to do, then sometimes it can lead to this release. And this is where we see that loss of verbal control, where everything that they're thinking or feeling is just flying out of their mouth and it's coming out any which way that it chooses to. And this is a time where things have kind of already gotten to a place where we are going to potentially maybe draw closer in a safe space where we can say, hey, I understand, like, you are feeling this way. And, we want to go to a space where we aren't yelling at them also. So when someone is at a loss of verbal control, we don't need to higher our volume so they can hear us. It's not likely going to help them come back down. At this point, we're going to allow them to vent and to release what's going on. And then we want to make sure we maintain the safety of everyone around us. So we always are going to use that if we feel like things are out of hand, or if someone has gotten to this release point and along with it, they're throwing stuff, they're, punching holes in the wall, they're at a space where we don't feel safe. We always use our safety rules, call 911 if it's an emergency, and we use our innate instincts in those moments when it comes to keeping everyone safe or asking other people to leave the space, so there's not an audience, because sometimes that can increase what's going on. Down the line here, we have intimidation. This is a lot of times you'll see it along with release. It's a lot of times those ping pong off one another. And this is where people are making direct threats. They are, I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to blow this place up. That obviously is not potentially something that we experience in our building. Definitely something that I have experienced in my previous workplace with kiddos, and adolescents. But it's definitely something that happens, and we do need to take it seriously. We need to take people for their word, and we need to get help. This can also be something we experience if someone is threatening to harm themselves. So, we've had circumstances where a participant has told us that they have suicidal intent, and we've had coaches that have had to make that decision to call 911 on their behalf, because we want to make sure that they're safe and that someone is there if we cannot be, because we can't always just go, there might be other things in the day. We can't always just drop, or we may not know, exactly where they're at the moment, maybe a general idea. But just doing that due diligence and taking it seriously, documenting it, and getting help if we need help. That kind of is leaning on what I was talking about if you feel like it's out of control and you need the police, you need authorities, you make that call. No one is going to fault you for making that call. We want everyone to stay safe. And then we have at the end of this continuum, which is really the goal if anybody ever gets to this point where they're verbally escalated, is tension reduction. And this is where a lot of times you're going to see people cry at this point. They're going to start come back down. If they've had labored breathing, they're going to start to return to a normal rate of breathing. They might start to look at you, make eye contact with you, re-engage with you in conversation. They might, start making statements that kind of just let you know that they're kind of over, or they're over this hump, and they're letting this roll. They've released what they need to release, and it's done. Not that people can't go from tension reduction back into being escalated, but this is the space where we really want to try to pull them out of it. And the response here that is, recommended by CPI is therapeutic rapport. And really that's just a word for rebuilding that relationship, taking the time to figure out, are you going to talk about this now and regroup? But you don't just ever want to, if you can help it, leave a situation that was completely escalated and then just not have it end with some type of regrouping and understanding. All right, so we're going to keep moving through. All right, so here is a video that we are going to watch. I want you guys to just take the time, pay attention to how the first individuals in the school react to this parent who's bringing forth a concern, and then how the gentleman at the very end reacts to the concern that he's bringing forth, and all of the factors involved in that. A little bit of context for what I've gathered from this is that this is a father who's coming to present a concern about his daughter's safety with being left at the school and not being taken home on the bus. They also do mention that she had a paraprofessional, which leads me to believe that there's potentially some type of disability or accommodation she needs in this school. So that likely contributes to his need and desire for her to be safe, although we all want our kids to be safe. So I just want you to kind of maybe place yourself in his shoes and experience this through the light of what he's trying to bring forth, and just take note of the different strategies to de-escalate him, and then think about what you may have done in this circumstance. And you can take notes while you're going through the video and just kind of have that experience to reflect on this circumstance. So you guys can go ahead and take the time now to do that. If it plays in the slide, great. If not, there should be a link below that you can click on to go straight to YouTube to watch the video. And I'll see you back whenever you're done. All right, so I hope you did get something out of that video and were able to see some distinct differences between how the initial people were interacting with that father and mother, and how the very last gentleman in the video was reacting, and just how our tone of voice, our posture, whether we look like I'm ready to go, I'm ready to clock out for the day and leave, and I'm not trying to deal with this situation, that can come across. And I think you probably saw that with some of the individuals in that first video, or there was a point in that video where one of the women that was interacting with the father threw her hands up and said she's done, and never really took that opportunity to validate the concerns of the father and really see the situation for what it was. Because as an observer, you can tell that it's really not an acceptable situation. And as a mother, I would absolutely have a difficult time maintaining any patience if that were to have occurred with my son, and that was the reaction I was getting from administration. So just an example for us to look through. This slide is focusing on another acronym for you. It's psychological de-escalation, and what it's talking about is when someone is in a place of being escalated, what is it they're looking for? And so the acronym is CRAVES, and it begins with the word CRAVES. And so the way that this is broken down is that someone that's escalated is craving responsiveness, acceptance, validation, empowerment, and safety. And so those are just things to keep in the back of your mind of how can I provide that to this person? And maybe you cannot provide every single one of these, but how can I provide as much as I can in this moment to allow them to experience this so they can get to a place where they do de-escalate? Some tips here are things that can be triggers is in saying, I understand, especially if you haven't experienced what that person is going through. That can be triggering because people can say, you don't understand. You've never been through this. You don't know. And so that is something to keep in mind. We're humans. We're going to say things that we want to provide comfort. And sometimes we're going to say things that, you might find yourself saying this and you're like, oh, I shouldn't say that. That's not what the intention is. It's just to know that you can say things that will make people feel worse and not better. depending on their circumstances, and just be aware of how they react to it. There could be people when you say, and I understand, that could bring some relief, but as a rule of thumb, a lot of times, especially if they don't know that you've been through it or that's not come up in conversation, it can feel belittling in some ways. Calm down. If someone is screaming at you and you're like, calm down, yeah, it doesn't usually work. A lot of times it does the opposite. Cool off, you're overreacting, like those things. Likely you're not going to say those things to people you're working with in a professional context. You might have said it. I know I have said calm down in a personal context, obviously. Again, these are just things to keep in mind. And then overt invalidation, just basically saying like what you're experiencing right now, or what you're saying you're experiencing, you're obviously not, because I can see that's not the truth. And the example here is, if you can talk, you can breathe. I drawn from, like, you're not choking. Maybe it feels like you're choking. That's maybe more of a physical example, but if someone is smiling and laughing and they're going through a really hard time, you could say, well, I guess, things don't seem that bad because they're fine. She's fine. That kind of thing can be dismissive. Things to say is that I can see that you're feeling this way. This situation, validating what they're saying, that I can see that this is terrifying to you, and I can imagine how scary it feels not to have control. Just some tips for things to say and maybe put into practice in your interactions. This is the last acronym of the day, I promise. It just says, it's a good way to keep some information and store it. So this is the coping method that we talked about being in our agenda today. And what it stands for is control, orient, patterns, investigate, negotiate, and give. So it's all about this therapeutic rapport piece of, when someone's experiencing that last stage of tension reduction, they have released, they've come back down. This is about reconnecting with them and debriefing, leaving that relationship repaired. So, giving them a sense of control and understanding that they have the ability to make some choices in the moment, not taking all choice away from them. Orienting ourselves towards them. So that can be physically orienting ourselves towards them. That can be through what we're saying as far as making sure they understand that we're with them, we're here for it, and we are making sure that that you're heard. And when we're talking about the reflective piece of this is where we get into the rest of this, and that's where are the patterns here? Is this happening every time they come into the circumstance? Are they reacting this way? What can we figure out maybe triggers this, or where is there opportunity to change? And then we investigate that. We say, is there something that we did that we need to change? Is there a way that we spoke, or a certain string of words that we put forth that made that person feel uncomfortable? Or is there a way that we were in our nonverbal communication communicating that we really didn't have concern for them? We investigate those things. And when it comes to like behavioral interventions, you decide if that intervention is effective, if something needs to change. You do a little bit more digging in that sense. You negotiate with that person. So there's a give and take. There's an appropriate space for give and take. Next time I'm gonna do this, and then I need you to do this. And so we look at that and then give. So just generously giving that generous interpretation of what has happened. So assuming that positive intent of they've got a lot going on, this is behind this reaction. There's this trauma that they've experienced in their life, and understanding what is the context of that situation, and giving a generous interpretation of what has happened, and not holding it against that person and holding it over their head for the rest of your experiences with them, and saying, oh, they reacted this way, they're going to do it again and again. That isn't what we're here to do. We're here, like when you go through your bridges training, we're here to help them write a new story. We are not here to just remind them continually of their old story. So just something to keep in the mix. And this context of de-escalating, it's really important to reestablish that relationship. These are just some tools for how to do it and ways to think about how to have that intentional debriefing conversation. And again, if it doesn't happen in the moment when things are escalated, just make sure that it does happen. Don't go without speaking about the circumstance, because it will build and we have to deal with those things. Even if they're difficult conversations, they are important to have. All right. Okay, lastly, we are talking about rational detachment. This is much for you as the person that is working with other individuals that might go through this. And it really has to do with staying in control of your behavior and not internalizing what other people are doing or saying, not taking it personally. This kind of draws back to that Q-tip, quit taking it personally. There's so much else going on. It really is not about us necessarily. Sometimes we are just the iceberg. And a lot of ways to make sure that we can maintain this is taking care of our personal health, our nutrition, our exercise. I know you probably have heard that 100 million times, but it is so important, especially in social service, to take care of yourself, because that compassion fatigue can happen. You lose sense of your why and you're drained and you're just trudging forward half fuel, and that's going to come across in what you do, and ultimately it's not good for you. So continuing training and getting education in your field of practice, like continue exposing yourself to what is working, new research, new practices, trainings like this, trainings that are out in the community. Just stay current on what's going on in your field and making sure that you incorporate what you're learning. Don't just take in the information, make sure you use it in your interactions with participants. That bias check and being honest with yourself, this kind of lends itself to our family-centered coaching principles, but making sure that if we are coming in with any preconceived notions about how things should be or what we want them to be when it relates to a participant, we really have to check ourselves. And we need to start to work through that and not bring it forth in our interactions with other people. And then, our sense of purpose and our spiritual health are also very important when it comes to being able to detach ourselves from the stress of the day, of what's happened, and being able to, go home to our families or our dogs, whatever that might look like, and not have ourselves take on the burdens and carry that weight, because it's too much. It's too much. So for after an escalation happens or someone is heightened, just making sure that you debrief, that if you need to go talk to your supervisor or a coworker, that you in a productive way that's not callous towards the other person or dismissive of what they've experienced. There's a appropriate way to be able to tell about what's happened, especially when it's something really difficult. That's completely appropriate. And just being mindful of what kind of conversation that leads to, and that's the piece that's a little bit more important to keep in mind. But there's nothing wrong with being able to express, wow, this was really hard. Can I tell you about what happened today? Because this was like super difficult to get through. So evaluate, modify your approaches, and leave work at work. That can be hard, but it's important, to leave work be work. And that's also another reason why it's so important to establish boundaries in the relationships with the families and the participants and even the children sometimes, that we have those in place, because it gets very messy ethically and emotionally if there are not boundaries there. So we have to remember what our purpose and our role is in the lives of the people that we work with, so we can effectively help them. This is a little quote here on the side. It's a little blurred, but rational detachment applies to situations as well as people. It is about finding something positive in the midst of uncertainty, shifting your focus from what's wrong to what you can do about it. So another way to look at that, just in addition to it. All right. So this is our last topic here, and we'll just kind of close up and recap, and then you can move on to the rest of your day or another training that you have. And just another reminder here that there is a reciprocal impact when it comes to your behavior. What you do it's going to impact those around you, whether you intend it to or not. Just understanding that that is a reality and we have to be mindful of it. And we're going to cap off the training with a Maya Angelou quote, and that is, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. So just this journey of continual learning and being there for our participants and knowing how we can help them day to day, but in the rough of it, when they're escalated, knowing how we can help them and guide them out of it and still be there for them non-judgmentally when we get out of it. All right, guys, thank you for doing this training. I hope that you got something from the information, and I hope that you got some tangible, practical tips that you can use with your participants or with your kiddos in day to day. And if you need anything just for clarification, you can send me an email or, a phone call or come see me and we can talk about it some more. So have a great day.